Okay. Hope everyone's doing well. We got about 60 people here, so that's amazing. I'm not sure if you guys had my previous class or not, so I'm going to be looking to the side sometimes just to look at notes and look at your chat, just to see your chats and answer questions. I'm not sure if I had you guys last time. It was a couple of days ago in lesson 3, but my name is Michael, and I've been a QA for about 4 years now. Just want to reintroduce myself for those maybe that I didn't have. And I've been a manual QA, and I work for a company called Insure, and that makes it basically provides insurance services. And before that, I worked for company Indeed, and where I learned how my first skills to be a QA, a manual QA. Okay, so it looks like you guys are familiar with me. That's awesome. Just a quick overview about your learning stage, where you're at and where you're going. So today is a lesson 4, and then from lesson 6, there will be homework. Lesson 11 is your homework deadline, and the final quiz is by lesson 15. Also want to remind you guys, you will get the recordings on all of these videos, and you should be able to be getting those in the email, so you can always rewatch those. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too much time here, and I want to jump right in. So just to kind of go back to the lesson 3 a little bit, last time we talked about the software development lifecycle. Do you guys still remember this? And did you have any questions, maybe new questions that showed up over the past couple of days that maybe some of the concepts weren't, easy to understand, or something that I might need to review? So it was everything clear. This is basically like the continuation of the software development lifecycle. So it's important that you guys understand it. And also today we're going to talk about some concepts that may be hard to grasp at first. I'll try to explain them as best I can, as in simplest terms. But they can be confusing. It took me quite some time to understand it. It actually took me a while to really sink in, not until I started working in those concepts, right, in methodologies that we're going to talk about today. So don't be afraid to not maybe understanding right away everything, and might sound crazy and confusing. Feel free to ask me questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can through at the end of each slide. And if I'm going too fast, let me know, because sometimes I might be going too quick, and just slow me down. So don't worry about slowing me down here. And just to kind of reiterate what we talked about last time, again, the software development lifecycle breaks down into 6 steps. You have the planning, the design, development, the testing, deployment, maintenance. Planning is where you plan, where you essentially plan out what you're going to be building, how it's going to be built. The design is usually how it's going to be tried out. A lot of the time also the developers figure out what methodology they're going to use, basically what systems they're going to use, how many servers they're going to use, or language they're going to use. Then the development is when they start building it. Testing is your job, is when you're going to be QAing. Deployment is how it's going to be shipped to the customer. And the maintenance, just kind of supporting the customer, supporting the application or the website, making sure there's no bugs and nothing like that. Question, what 3 phases do we test? That was one of the questions on the lesson. It was one of the questions. What 3 phases do we test? So you test the testing phase. You'll also be testing essentially a lot of the times you get some of the deployment testing that you'll be doing, but you can also be testing in development a little bit, and even sometimes not really in design. Usually design is when it's just being designed and it's not being developed. So, but the testing phase is the main stage. That's when you're going to be testing. Okay, so let's talk about the waterfall approach, and today we're going to talk about the waterfall, the agile approach, and then how Scrum and Kanban systems fit into that. So the waterfall model is relatively linear sequential design approach for certain areas of engineering design. So in software development, it tends to be among the less interactive and flexible approaches. The process flows in a largely one direction, like a downwards like a waterfall, through the phases of concept, iteration, analysis, design, construction, testing, deployment, and maintenance. So basically, the idea of waterfall, it started out, it's an older system. However, it's still used today, just not as much, right? And I'll go over what are the downfalls of the waterfall, why it's not flexible. But essentially, it's you cannot go to the next step until you finish the first step and until it's approved. So the requirements have to be written out in detail. They have to be approved and by all of the parties before the requirements can be handed over to the design team, for example, right? So, and the design team then looks over the requirements and they develop and design, I shouldn't say develop, but they design the system around the requirements. So they figure out, okay, if we need a server, what is that going to take? If it's if we're building a website, again, what colors it needs to be using, what information needs to be on there. And then once that's approved, only at that point, the implementation starts. Now, in waterfall, you cannot go backwards. It always has to be one after another. So you cannot go to the next step. You cannot go to the testing step until the implementation is finished, right? You can't go to deployment state until full testing is complete. You can't really go back. And essentially, that's the idea of the waterfall. It was used, and it may still be used in a large corporations or like in a government, in like military, maybe aviation, or hospitality, because they have very rigid requirements, right? They have to follow certain rules. They have to follow maybe certain laws, like in healthcare. Healthcare is highly regulated by the government. So they need to make sure when they build a software that it has to have certain components in the software. You're not going to get any feedback throughout your implementation of the software on your or design or build. You have requirements. You have to set these rules up in the beginning. And then once you have the requirements done, you maybe even need to show it to the government, say, this is what I'm building. Can you approve this? And the government says, yes, we do approve. And then that moves over to design, and then it goes into the implementation. And the problem is that once you start implementing based on these requirements, and you find that it's not the way you want, or you want to change it, you can't, because you can't go back to the government and say, oh, you know what, we changed our mind. Can we please make this change? You can't do it. You have to go all the way through, and it's not very flexible. And so one of the ideas, the reason we had this, and is imagine, let's say, like Windows. Back in the day, you had Windows 95, right? And you build the software, and you want a new version to come out. Let's say Windows 98. It takes essentially 2-3 years to deliver a new version of the of the software. You back in the day, you didn't have internet, you didn't have fast internet. You couldn't just give your customer a new version over the internet with an hour up download and you have a Windows 98. Back in the day, you really had to put in the requirements, you really had to build it, you really had to test it to the little detail, and then put it on a CD, and only then you would sell it, and then the customer can get a new version. So this is where the waterfall approach came in, and this is one of the reasons it wasn't really flexible, but it's really rigid, right? I think about examples of waterfall approach, like building a bridge, right, or a house. Exactly. We have a blueprint, and you can't change that. Otherwise, it's going to be too expensive. So there is no flexibility. Exactly. You can't rethink a design of a bridge, if you have it built halfway through, right? You can't just say, oh, actually, I want to have a different design of a bridge. It doesn't work like that. Let's see if I if that approach makes sense, right? This what is a waterfall? I hope we all on the same page here. Let me just make sure I didn't forget anything. Okay, cool, awesome. So what are the downfalls? Some of those already I just mentioned, but so the new phase starts only when the previous is completed and there's no returning to the previous phase, right? So again, once you have it approved, you can go back. And usually a lot of the time, again, it's whether that's with the government agency or maybe some kind of a law that you have to follow. The waterfall approach does not allow phase overlap. However, to increase the efficiency and reduce the cost, the phases may overlap. Sometimes the development and the testing could overlap. You might be able to test some of the things that are being sent over to you in like a small increments, but it's not always the case. Users have little interaction with the project, and their feedback is not taken during development. Right. So this could be the same way where a government agency comes to a company and says, "This is what we want to build. These are the requirements, and that's all we want." And the agency might not see it until the company builds the software for them. At the end, they will deliver and say, "Okay, this is what we put together for you." And maybe once the government starts, agency starts using it, they're like, "Well, we don't really want that. We wanted something else." Well, that's a whole new project, right? Which makes a waterfall a good part for development, is that you can plan it out in the beginning. You can figure out exactly what your cost is going to be and how long it's going to take, because you put so much effort in the planning. And once you plan this out, you have it fixed, you deliver it, in the end, it's going to be a whole new project, right? If you want to make a change or you want to make it an adjustment, it's going to be a whole new project, and you have to replan it from the beginning. So the waterfall model does not support delivery of a system in pieces, right? You can't just give them a small part of a software. You have to basically, or whatever that may be. And the waterfall model assumes that all of the customer requirements can be completely and correctly defined at the beginning of the project. In actuality, customer requirements keep on changing with time. After the requirement specification phase, it's very difficult to accommodate any changes requests. Right, exactly. So if a company wants to make a change in a waterfall approach, they won't be able to give feedback, and so you might deliver something that the customer would have liked to change or make an adjustments, but they couldn't, and that's a downfall of a waterfall approach. Let's see. Do we have those approaches in our testing work somewhere, or is it more about how to work in a team? It's more about how to work in a team. I heard about waterfall and agile from project management, and I will go over the agile approach, and I will go over the Scrum system and things like that, and how I use it essentially at work as well. It would reset the entire process, right? You would have to basically start from scratch. And let's see. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. So yeah, so it could also, the problem with waterfall, sometimes it could take a long time for each of the stages to be finished. So it could take let's say the requirement, you put together a requirement and it has to be approved by the government. You send that over to them, and the stage could take a month, could take 2 months, and you're not able to you can't start anything. You can't start building anything. You can't put any designs in, because you never got an official approval from, like the government agency, or maybe it's a hospital that you're building it for. You might have it figured out, the requirements great, completely amazing, but you never got an approval. Once you got an approval from the requirements, you move it over to the design, and the design team starts figuring out how the software is going to look, the colors it's going to use. It might figure out where the button is going to go. So they draw this out, this beautiful website, and you have to get this approved again. So you would send it back to the government agency maybe, and they will look it over and say, okay, we like the colors, we like how the look and feel is going to be of it. And it might take another month or two to approve. Then you get it back, and only at that point can you move to the development stage, right? So you see why it could take a really long time with the waterfall approach to get to the final stage. So if there is a defect or a flaw in a requirement, that will be continued later in stages. Not necessarily. So in testing phase, you can see a flaw, but the question is if that's flaw different from what the requirement is, because if it is, then it's a bug and you need to fix it and make sure that it matches the whatever's in the requirement. Right. But if it's a requirement, if it's a flaw in a requirement, then that's not your fault. It's it's a miss, and you have to finish the whole project with the specific flaw. Maybe it's might not be a flaw, but something that the customer doesn't want anymore. But it's already been pre-planned, it's already been approved, the budget have been allocated, the time has been allocated, and you can't really you're not flexible. You have to stick with what you've planned. Okay. And so agile approach, essentially it's a continuation of a waterfall approach, but it's flexible, right? It's an approach to software development under which requirements and soft solutions evolve through the collaborative effort of self-organizing cross-functional team and their customers and users. It advocates adaptive planning, evolutionary development, early delivery, continual improvement, while encouraging rapid and flexible response to change. Okay, that's a mouthful, but essentially, let's take the way Agile kind of came to be is you have these developers, who, let's say we're building Windows 95 and Windows 98, and they're like, okay, well, how can we give our users software updates faster and better? I mean, we now have internet, right? We now have ability to get feedback from our customers. They're able to in real time tell us what they like and what they don't like. Instead of us waiting 2-3 years to give them a new version of the Windows system, let's figure out a way that we can get that feedback from our client. Let's figure out how do we how do we get development faster? How do we deliver? How do we develop faster, test faster, design faster? And this agile approach came to be, and the emphasis is to kind of give, instead of just being stuck to a contract and for the approval that you got, let's get feedback from our clients, because our customers are our number one priority, and we want to make sure the software we're building is always on the edge. It's always the best of the best that we can deliver. It's always has the latest updates, and it has the the best testing, and it has the best feedback from our clients. Because if we want to move with time, things are changing so quick, and with internet, we want to be able to figure out, okay, well, our customer wants this button to be on the bottom left corner versus the top right corner, right? How do we get that feedback quickly? How do we put that into the development, and how do we test it quickly and get it to our customer quickly and get that feedback right away, right? Did they like that we made that change for them? Do we need to make another change, right? This is the agile approach, and the number one thing in the agile approach is to get that feedback and make sure you're competitive to all of your other competition. Because if you get stuck in the waterfall approach and your competition is doing agile, they're always changing and they're always developing, and you're stuck behind because you have to wait a year before you get all the testing and development done, and only a year later you deliver the software, but you're too late. Your competition already has something new, 15 iterations before you, and you have such an advanced software versus where you took so long. So that's the agile. Developers wanted to get to their customers quicker and implement their feedback from customers much faster. All right. Let's see if any questions. Does this make sense? Okay, cool. Right, so this is in order to become more efficient, create better software. This makes sense. Okay, so all right, let's keep going. Okay, so I'm gonna read this slide and I'm gonna try to explain to you what we're looking at here. So agile is an umbrella term for several iterative and incremental software development approaches. With each of those variations being its own agile framework, the most popular agile frameworks include Scrum, Kanban, extreme programming, and feature-driven development. So while each agile methodology types has its own unique qualities, they all incorporate elements of interactive development and continuous feedback when creating an application. So each agile framework is considered lightweight. Rules and practices are kept to the minimum, especially when compared to traditional waterfall style development process, and are designed to be adaptive to all kinds of circumstances. Okay, so let's imagine that you want to start a company and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how are we going to build the software? Are we going to use the waterfall approach because we're building, SpaceX starships, and we only have one opportunity to get it right, because if we ship it over, if we send it over to Mars, it better land. We're not going to get any feedback. Or are we going to use the agile approach because we're not building, spaceships, we're building software, and we can get feedback from our customers and we can stay agile and continue make changes. And your company says, okay, we want to be agile. We want to constantly change. We want to constantly deliver the best software we can. So how do we organize? How do we use agile? How do we organize into a system where we can get this feedback from our customers? How do we organize our to-dos, and how does developers work with project managers, product managers, testers? Let's organize into let's imagine like a board where we put our to-do list and our chores that we need to do. And agile can be organized into the Scrum, Kanban, and extreme programming or feature-driven development. Essentially, the question is, what is Scrum and Kanban? So it is think of it as a way to organize your company in an agile environment. So you as a company, like, okay, you say, we're going to be agile. Let's do the Kanban approach. The Kanban is basically, think of them as like, we talked a little bit about our last lesson of the Jira, where you have these columns, what has to do. And this to do, you have little sticky notes that go from to do to in QA and then done, right? Something along the lines. That's Kanban. That's basically us organizing our company into an agile framework. And we're going to use the Kanban system to continue this agile framework. And some companies said, well, we want to make, Kanban is not enough. We want to make it something a little bit more, more organizing. And then Scrum is another system. It uses Kanban in it, but it also adds a couple more things to it. And I'll go over those in a little bit in later slides. But essentially, Scrum is a system that the company uses to be organized and stay in agile framework. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Let me know if it doesn't. Ask me questions. Okay. Why is it called iterative incremental software development approach? So this is, it's a constant loop, right? So we're gonna take like a small part, and we're gonna take the small part through this cycle, and this is iterative, right? So this feature we're building is, we're gonna review it, we're gonna deploy it, we're gonna test it, develop it, design it. Actually, sorry, the other way. We're gonna design this feature, we're gonna develop, we're gonna test it, deploy it, review. And we're gonna take this, when we review this feature, we're gonna see how we did, and we're gonna redesign it if we need to, again develop it, again test it. And that's iterative. It's just continuously moving through the cycle. Okay. Right, constant loop, because it's constantly changing. Exactly. And you're constantly improving on top of that. And it designed the agile framework. You kind of think of it as like, okay, we want to keep it lightweight. So we want to have a small team. We want to have small work. And we want to, you're building maybe a big software, but you're breaking it down into small parts, so it's easier to manage. So like it says here, rules and practices are kept to the minimum. So agile is really like a philosophy. Whenever agile shows up in a company, there is a philosophy to keep things lightweight, and keep it to the minimum, So especially compared to the waterfall style. Waterfall style, it could, like, the requirements are huge. The design is huge, right? Because you can't make changes. And this development of waterfall could take a year, right? Maybe 2 years, where agile is constant change, constant update. Because yes, in pieces. Exactly. It's in small pieces, small features. If you miss something, I highly recommend, like, this is being recorded, so you can always go back and you can always rewatch this if none of these concepts makes any sense, but also ask some questions. Can the agile framework, can you go back to the previous step? In agile, you could go back to the previous step. You can give feedback, exactly. And I'll go over that in a second as well. Last page. Is this the page? Again, right. So this is agile. You have a feature, you have a requirement for a feature, you design it, you develop it, test it, deploy it, review. And in the review, you figure out if you need to make an adjustment. You can also even get feedback from your customer. Did they like this particular feature? So what is the advantage of using the waterfall approach, seeing that it's so rigid? The advantage is for, well, some companies can't really use it. I mean, again, if you're building a spaceship and you need to make sure you test it so that when when it goes out of space and lands on the moon, you want to make sure that the legs open and it is able to, because you're not going to get any feedback from the moon to make sure that you can make adjustments to that it lands. You send it out and it goes, and that's essentially waterfall. It's usually, you can probably see it in right now in software development. I think the best way is probably like operating system, like on iOS, iPhone iOS. You get an update every maybe 3-6 months. You get a new version, and if something breaks in it, I mean, they are better at fixing small things, but like a whole new change, if you didn't like the way the new design of the icons on the iOS, even if you give you feedback, that change is not going to come until next year, if it ever will, right? With agile, companies are usually able to make that change quickly. If customer didn't like it and they get a lot of negative feedback, they will make an adjustments much quicker. Is the waterfall still usable? Yes, it is still usable. I think I have a feeling, if you ever let's see, if you, an example that you might be able to understand. Imagine like Apple Maps and Google Maps, right? If you ever use an iPhone, you might have both. So what are the cool things about the Apple Maps is that you have, it looks nicer to me anyway. It's much smoother when you drive. It works very well with the iPhone and all the other apps. But the disadvantage is, if there needs to be a change in Apple Map, there's a business that's showing up wrong, it has to be, you have to wait till the next update for the iOS, which could take 2-3 months. Where with Google Maps, they send updates through the App Store maybe every week. And if there's if you are a business owner and you look at the Apple Maps and you're like, oh, my business has a misspelling, who do I write feedback to so they can change it next time? You might figure out who you need to write, and they might change it, but it's going to take 3 months to see that update. With Google Maps, you can go to the App Store, you can go to the review to review the app. You can right there write, hey, you got my business wrong, and you can even rate how many stars you want to give it. And in a week, you might get a new, Google update, Google Map update, and it will be a fix there, because their Google Maps might be working on agile framework much quicker. They give more iterations. They ship out their product much faster. They make more updates much quicker, right? Is it because some circumstances are fixed, which is why it requires the waterfall approach? Yes, the in-circle requirements will be successful. I mean, again, waterfall, if you are essentially it's used in more regulated places, in a government agency. So when you're building a software for military, for example, they have specific specifications that you have to meet, and it has to be approved. And that's why they use waterfall approach. Once you get an approval on the requirements, you can go back. I mean, if you have to make an adjustment to the requirements again, you have to send it for approval, which could take, a month, two, maybe a year to get an approval on any change you want to make to the software. And that's why you're kind of stuck. And that's usually a waterfall approach there. I feel like I talked a little bit about this already, but just kind of go over the slide. Okay, so clients may find it challenging to conceptualize their functional requirements during the planning. This means they may change their mind once they see the end product, which is difficult to address if the application needs to be re-engineered to any large extent. And the waterfall is based entirely on following a set of steps that keep team always moving forward. The methodology is traditional form, leaves most no room for unexpected changes or revisions. So let's say another example is you're building software for a customer in a waterfall approach, and you need to figure out how much is going to cost. And you decide, okay, well, for this software, we will need one server, to be able to process like 1 million transactions a month. And we need a server, and this how much the server is going to cost us $1 million, and we need this money. And the company says, okay, well, we only have $1 million, so make sure you got this calculation correct, because any more than that, this is not going to work for us. And your company is like, yeah, we did the calculations. Definitely 1 million is enough. We need one server. It's fine. In a waterfall approach, you have this, you okay everything. You got the requirements approved. You give it to design. The design starts building it. Everything's good. Development, everything's fine. Gets to the QA phase. You start testing it, and you figure out that, you know what, you need more than one server. You need like 3 servers. You need 3 servers to be able to process 1 million transactions a month. And but you can't go back. You could go back and say, look, we actually miscalculated. We didn't know, but we need more servers. And the company said, well, listen, you told us this is all the budget that we have. And even if we had more money, you just spent 6 months building this for us, and you're telling us that it's not enough. So this is where waterfall is not flexible. This could be a huge mistake on the company, on their reputation, and it doesn't look very good. Because with agile, you'd be able to make this plan. Even if you got this requirements in, you go to the design phase, and you can show the design to the customers. Hey, does this design work for you? Is this okay? And then they can approve it, and you can go back to the development. You can start developing it, and your developers can say, look, one server is not enough. We need a couple more servers. And you didn't have to wait 6 months to get to the QA phase. You could have gotten this information in 3 months, because you've already started developing, and developers uncovered this, and you can go back to the customer and get that feedback. So it's much, much quicker. Let's see if I missed any questions. They might use the software to be more secure. Exactly. Yeah, that's why waterfall for military might be work better, because they need certain security there. But something that stops the waterfall process to be considered a blocker. I'm not sure I understand the question. Can you explain the difference between design and development phase? Design is a couple of things that happens in design. Design is where either designers figure out the feel and the look, like the UX UI design. What colors is going to be, how buttons are going to look like, what font is going to be used, where the buttons go. Also, in design phase, developers sometimes figure out what language they're going to use to build the software. What framework they're going to try to figure out. Is it going to be JavaScript, or is it going to be Python? That's in design phase. In development phase, this is when basically engineers start coding. Simple as that. A blocker is a bug type, not an approach. Blocker bug report. With something that stops the waterfall proceed considered a blocker. No, so I think blocker and bug reports, those are two different things. A blocker is a bug type, not an approach, right? Oh, what I mean when I talk about the blocker, I mean like a blocker means it's something that doesn't allow you to continue on to the next step because of the contract and because of maybe what you have figured out with your client, as an example. I think that's what we're talking about. Sorry if I got that wrong. Let's see if I missed anything. Waterfall approach is used more in regular environment. Correct. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about agile software development workflow. So in agile, the software project is broken down into smaller features in order for the development team to develop quickly, which is essential to keeping an agile release cadence. This iterative approach allows for quick software development and release while gathering user feedback and adjusting requirements accordingly. So, you know, with agile, you can build a number of features at the same time, and you can continuously building that and get feedback, you know, from all of the stages as well as from your customer. So let's say you have, you know, feature A and feature B, even all of these 4 features being built, and feature A is already built, you can start shipping that to your customer, and you can already get feedback on it, while the other features are still being built out. Where with waterfall, you know, you might have to get all of these features built before you can ship it to a customer. It's a whole thing, because you want to make sure, for example, in military, that all of these things are secure as one block, and it's QA'd and it's tested before it gets shipped over to your customer. And your customer might like it, they might not. If they don't like it, you have to start from scratch and from the beginning, build new requirements, get new approvals, and restart the whole process. Which with Agile, you can just deliver the first feature and see what your customer thinks. Did they use it? Did they like it? Did they want to make an adjustment to it while you're still building the other features? And then, you know, if they want to make an adjustment to feature A, you can deliver feature C, and get feedback from there while you make an adjustments to the first feature. So that's why Agile is very, you know, is very agile. Essentially, it's always, you're always up to date. And with internet, it's much quicker to get updates and get updates to your customer, to your client, and get feedback from your customer and client, right? Let's see. I'm going through these pretty quick, so if you guys have any questions, please let me know. This could be confusing. I may be going too quick. I may be going, and maybe too confusing, and you're afraid to ask. So think of it as well, like A/B testing can also be done in Agile. You know, maybe you have like out of your 100 customers, 50 customers get one version of your app, and another 50 get maybe a second version of the app, and you want to see which one gets more interaction, which app gets more purchases or more views or more interactions with versus, you know, another version of your app. It could be the same app, it just, you do the A/B testing. And with A/B testing, Agile approach works great. You can't really do it with waterfall. You can deliver one version and hope for the best, and then, you know, like let's say a heart monitor, you build a heart monitor, you have to really follow certain requirements. You really have to develop in a certain way, make sure that the requirements met by the, you know, the FDA, for example. And then you test it and you ship it, and the customer, you know, might not like it. Oh, it's too big, it doesn't feel right, it's itchy, or whatever it may be. And instead of going back and make adjustments to it, you might have to build a whole new heart monitor, and you have to get new approvals because it's using new tech or it's different size, so on and so forth. Is regulation testing often used by QA and Agile approach? So It depends on the company. I mean, if you work for a company that's highly regulated, it depends on how they want to organize, the way they work. It might be that they to be in the waterfall approach because they're regulated, but I'm sure there's companies that also are regulated, but they don't necessarily need to be in the waterfall approach. They might be able to be agile. It just maybe they don't get as much feedback as some other companies. So there is no beta testing in a waterfall approach, but there is an agile. Not necessarily. I think Apple iOS has kind of they have beta. They're again, they might not be using waterfall approach, but it definitely looks like they are. So they're releasing software. Maybe they release software once a year, but they do have these beta versions that you can download and again test your own software on these new versions. They might not get as much feedback on them. They might not, care about their customers' feedback as much. They have a certain design they have in mind, and they don't care if their customers like it or not. They have it set up. They might have an OS versions already set up 3-4 years in advance. They know exactly how it's going to look like, and they might not be, okay with. They don't care about adjusting in certain things. Since we are not really part of all parts of SDL, how does agile or waterfall affect the job of a QA? So 90%, well, I wouldn't say 90, but most of the companies now, especially software companies and online companies, most likely you're going to be working at one of those. They use the agile approach because they want to be able to deliver to their customer the latest and the greatest software with the best features, and most likely you're going to be working in an agile environment. I am probably 90% sure out of these two approaches, you will be in agile. I haven't seen waterfall that much, but it could be both, right? It could be one or the other. And again, a lot of the time, companies don't necessarily so strict about their approach. They might use, like a very flexible waterfall approach, or they might use an agile approach with some waterfall features in it. They might have some things that they say, okay, well, this particular feature has to be like a waterfall style because it's regulated, but the rest is okay. So it could be that. Do they make a difference in what QA do? So the thing about these approaches is for QA, as a QA, it's how you're going to be working within your team. You just have to understand these concepts to understand where you fit within the team and how you're going to get work passed to you and how you will pass the work further down the chain, as an example, right? So we will go over the how companies organize themselves with Agile using Scrum, right? They use Scrum system to be agile, right? And we'll go over how, as a QA, how you're going to see yourself and how you're going to fit there. And I do want to take a break. I know this is a lot of information, and we've been talking for almost an hour. So how you guys are feeling? All testing types goes with agile approach. Testing goes with agile. It could be with waterfall. It doesn't matter. If you get something that you need to QA, it doesn't matter which approach you guys are using. If companies use this method and release them to the end user, is QA really used a lot? Yes, QA is used in all software companies that I've seen. QA is used a lot. There's a lot of manual testing, a lot of automation testing. I've seen a few companies that don't use QAs, don't have QAs, but I don't think they're doing very well. I think Wayfair doesn't use QAs, and they're not doing well. Okay, so let's do a quick little, let's say 10-minute break. I'm gonna get some water, and then we're gonna go and we're gonna talk about Scrum, and that's a lot of information. So not to get you guys overwhelmed here. Let's be back. Let's come back in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay. All right, let's go back. And maybe I can read some questions here real quick. You guys can hear me, yeah? Maybe see me, hear me? Yes. All right, cool. Let's just kind of recap. And I did see a question. I'm a bit confused. What is the main difference between waterfall and agile? Uh, so the main difference basically is waterfall is not flexible and it's very rigid, designed to follow rules, timelines, budgets. It's has to be approved for every stage. And agile is very, the main idea, the main value of agile is to be flexible, right? Is to integrate feedback, be able to change and have a continuous development and continuously improve, where you have updates and maybe changes every couple of weeks, versus where maybe with waterfall, it's usually the updates are when there's a, you know, like a huge release, right? Maybe there's a new software that's coming out, and new version of the software takes a year to develop, to test, to deploy. And agile is, you know, it's used by a lot of the time by online companies who can deliver updates much quicker. Just waterfall was a bit old, outdated, popular maybe 10-15 years ago. And then developers decided we need to make a change. We live in a new world. We need to be able to make updates quicker. And they came up with this agile concept. And we're going to talk about how this concept is organized in companies and how it's used using a Scrum system, where you will be most likely work and you will be using that. Let's see. Will you have questions about Agile on the interview? I would think so. I don't think it's like a common question, but you might be asked about it on the interview. But most of the time, the companies you're gonna go interview with, they are most likely using Agile. And some people haven't never used waterfall. I've personally not ever used waterfall. So, you know, if you interviewed with me, I wouldn't ask this question because I would assume you've been using agile system. Okay, yes. Waterfall Apple, not necessarily. I mean, maybe some parts in Apple, like iOS, like an operating system. A lot of the software that's used by hardware is probably using waterfall, because, you know, once you ship, let's say your TV has, I mean, it's not that much anymore because everything has internet, right? You can send an update to anything, to any piece of software anymore. But let's say, I don't know, your car, and even cars now, but your car has a software. You can't deliver updates to your car software unless you go to the dealership, they plug it in and they give you an update. Those types of things are waterfall. Instagram agile, exactly. Absolutely, Instagram is 100% agile. Okay, so that makes sense. And so now let's, you know, once your company, go back to like the idea, you have a company that you're running, a software company, and you decided to use the agile framework. Let's organize it into a Scrum framework. So if agile is a philosophy, right, being able to be lightweight, and have the core values essentially are, you know, customer and relationship with the customer versus, you know, contract, like it is with waterfall. Scrum is specific methodology used to manage the project, right? It's specific set of rules, or not really rules, but recommendations to be able to have your team organized to be in an agile philosophy the best way possible, right? So it's organized. The project team, led by a project manager, consists of the product owner, a Scrum master, and other cross-functional team members. According to the Scrum principles, the optimal size of a team should be between 6 to 10 members. Teams have daily Scrum meetings, usually no longer than 50 minutes to provide status updates. So you decided, your company decided, we're going to use agile philosophy, and we're going to organize into Scrum. So what are the rules? Like, what are the recommendations? The recommendation is that you have a team that has no more than 6 to 10 members in it. If it's more than 10 people, your team is too big. You're not being agile enough, because if you have more people, you have to get approvals, you have to talk to more people. When you have 6 people, you can get on a call, or a stand-up, which is 15 minutes, and you can start figuring out, hey, what are you working on? What are your blockers? What's going on? This is what I do every day at my company. We have a daily stand-up in the morning, and we get on the call because we all work remote. We get on the call every day for 15 minutes. It's called stand-ups because usually during those meetings, you are, if you're in the office, you have to be standing up. It's not long enough to be sitting down to take notes, but it's long enough for you to get tired of standing up, so you can just talk to each other real quick. What do you need? What are you working on? What did you work on yesterday? And that's a Scrum meeting. That's a Scrum 15-minute stand-up meeting. That's one of the Scrum recommendations to manage your project, right? And it consists of, let's say, a project manager or maybe a product manager usually. That is the person who can answer all of the questions about the product, right? You have a couple of developers, a QA who's testing the particular project, and and that's your team, right? So the Scrum methodology is characterized by short phases or sprints. When the project will occur, during sprint planning, the project team identifies a small part of the scope to be completed during the upcoming sprint, which is usually 2 to 4 week period. Okay, so another recommendation by the Agile methodology, by the Scrum system, says, okay, you want to create sprints. A sprint is essentially 2 or maybe 4 week period. And so you get together with your team, which consists of, again, 10 people, and you're like, okay, our next sprint, meaning our next 2 weeks, this is what we want to build. This is what we want to accomplish. And you figure out within this team what your delivery is going to accomplish in the next 2 weeks. So let's say you want to build, you want to fix these 2 bugs. You want to put let's say a button on this page, and you want to create this particular page that has this information. And how long is this going to take? This is going to take 2 weeks. Plus, you'll be able to maybe QA this in the 2 weeks. And this is your sprint. It's a short phase, so that this sprint, by the end of those 2 weeks, you can deliver either something to the customer or whoever the delivery party that may be. So you want to show something. Hey, in 2 weeks we're going to have this little feature. In another 2 weeks we're going to have another feature, or we're going to fix these few bugs in this sprint. And that you're going to be working within sprints. Are sprints goals in time frame? Sprints are literally a set of it's just a time frame. And usually some companies have it like a sprint is 1 week. Some companies have a sprint 2 weeks. Some have it 3 weeks. I haven't seen 4 weeks. That may be too long, but essentially, usually 2 weeks is most common. Those are hosted through Zoom now. Yeah, most likely. Most things are through Zoom now. So at the end of the sprint, this work should be ready to be delivered to the client. Finally, the sprint ends with a sprint review and retrospective, or rather lessons learned. This cycle is repeated throughout the project lifecycle until the entirety of the scope has been delivered. So try to explain it in simple ways. So let's say your company or a company you work for is building 4 or 5 features for a customer, and they decide which features are going to go into how many sprints. You might have 2, maybe 3 sprints, right? If you have 3 sprints and each sprint is 3 weeks, how much can we deliver to our customer in each of these sprints? Can we deliver 1 feature in each sprint? Can we deliver 2 features in each sprint? Or should we deliver 1 feature in sprint and fix 2 bugs? So every time you have, maybe you go to an app store and you have an update of a specific app, that's a release, and that may be, you can see maybe an update there. Every 2 weeks you have a new update. You thought, oh, I just had an update on this app, I already downloaded it, and there's a new one. They probably had they had a sprint, and in that sprint they decided to release a new feature. And at the end of each sprint, you have what's called like a review, a sprint review, or a retrospective, they also call it, where you're going to get together with your team and you're going to talk about what you did for those 2 sprints. How did the sprint go? Did you guys get to the bugs you were planning to fix in these 2 weeks, or did you get to fix this feature or build this feature that you wanted to build in these 2 weeks? Were you able to get to it, or do we need to move this to the next sprint? These talks, collaborations, you're going to be having almost every day. The retrospectives, the reviews, maybe at every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. The stand-ups are going to be every day. And this is, now you are working in agile. You're being agile. You're an agile philosophy, and you're using Scrum system to organize yourselves or your team by using these tools. And the first tool, stand-ups, 15-minute stand-ups, no more than 10 members. 2-week sprints, meaning no more than 2 weeks of work for maybe whatever features you decide to build. And at the end of each sprint, you're gonna get on the call and you're gonna decide, how did it go? Were you successful? Did you make any mistakes? Did you need to figure out what lessons you learned, so that the next sprint, you're not gonna make the same mistakes? Does that make sense so far? We're doing okay. Okay, you guys are good. All right, what is scoping? The scope is, where did you see that? It's basically, it's the same thing. It's a time or a certain amount of work. So this is the Scrum. And during this, okay, so what is this trying to show you? This is going to try to show you what is involved in the sprint, right? What we talked about here. Sprint has, it's a short phase, meaning 2 weeks. And this is how these 2 weeks are going to be organized. You get together with your team, and you're going to figure out what you want to put into this sprint, or meaning in the next 2 weeks. What are you trying to accomplish in the next 2 weeks? And you look at what you currently have, and let's say the product backlog creation. So you might have some tickets in backlog. You might have, the backlog essentially means there's a bunch of features and a bunch of bugs that you can't get to because your team may be not big enough, you might not have enough people, and it keeps piling up, but it's not necessarily something that you need to get to right away. You might have a bug sitting in the backlog that's not extremely important. It may be like there's a button that's the wrong color, but right now you have other things you got to get to because your customer wants a certain feature, and you're going to keep that in backlog because you don't have enough maybe engineers to get to, or it's not in your scope of work. And that's what scope is. You don't need, you don't have the amount of manpower to be able to get to to all of the things that's on backlog. So backlogs usually has a bunch of tickets that adds up, and then it's organized based on priority, how important it is for the team to fix or for the customer to get. And at the beginning of each sprint, you get together with your team and you start picking things out from there. It's like, okay, on this sprint, we're going to work on this ticket, and we're going to try to fix this bug here. And you're going to put it into a sprint. And then 2 weeks are gonna, that happens in sprint planning, and you're gonna be involved in sprint planning. You're gonna be part of this call, and you're gonna give you feedback and say, okay, this is the ticket, this is the bug I found, this is what needs to be fixed in it, and this is how it happened. Would we be able to fix it in this sprint, or do we need to go, or does it need to wait till the next sprint? And the product manager said, okay, we should be able to get to your bug fix this sprint, and they'll put it into the sprint because we have enough people to be able to take care of it. And this is going to go in the sprint. You may be testing certain things. This bug was fixed by the developers. It was given to you as a QA. You tested it. It passed. and the 2 weeks it was passed, and then it's going to be go ahead and be released to your customer. And at the end of the sprint, you're going to get on a call, and you're going to have a retrospective where everyone gets on the call again, and you all have a conversation about how did it go? Did we get to all of the things that we put in the sprint? Did we fix all the bugs I wanted to fix in the sprint? Because if we didn't, that bug that didn't get fixed will be put onto the backlog. And in the next call, maybe in the next week, on Monday, you got to get on the call and you're going to look at this backlog of tickets that are there, and you're going to start picking it again for the next sprint. And the sprint is going to go 2 weeks. So, new sprint started, you're building features, you're fixing bugs. 2 weeks go by. At the end of 2 weeks on Friday, you get on the call. How did we do? Did we get everything we wanted to get? What got through? What didn't? Okay, this didn't get through. We'll try to work on it the next sprint. The next week comes on. You come on Monday to work, and you start your sprint planning. And in sprint planning, you figure out what you want to do for the next 2 weeks. Simple. I hope it's simple enough. It's probably the simplest way I can explain what a sprint is. Let's see if you guys have any questions. In a sprint backlog, is that where they choose what features they are going to do in a sprint? Exactly. Right. That's exactly what it is. It's sprint planning. Sprint planning, you figure out what it is that you're going to build for the next 2 weeks, which features you're going to work on, and what you want to deliver to your customer in the next 2 weeks. Has there ever been a bug that took multiple sprints? Absolutely. Sometimes there are bugs that are complex and developers are not able to figure out. Sometimes it's not important enough. It may be not a major bug, and they would just keep it on backlog. My company, there was a bug about, it was like a copy that was wrong on one of the pages, and for whatever reason, we just couldn't get to it. It was complex, even though it doesn't sound like it was complex. So, but it wasn't a huge impact. Like, customer was still able to use the website. It wasn't huge, just a small issue. And it was in backlog for, a couple of months, which is, essentially like 6 or 8 sprints. Eventually we got to it, but it happens. If it's not major, it could still stay there for a little bit. Okay, have you ever worked on a project and the project owner stated that the project is obsolete? Obsolete, no, but usually it's it may be pivoted, not necessarily like not done anymore, but it could be that the customer wanted something else. Sometimes there's a drawback in Agile. The drawback on Agile is that sometimes you are working on and you're building and you're testing some feature that the customer at the end might not want, or they might change it completely. And you did all this work and it was like, oh, they don't actually want it this way, or they don't want this feature anymore to be released. Because you're always moving so quick and you're always, making updates and you're building things so quickly. It took, for example, we had a feature that we were building for a couple of months for one of our clients, and it was working fine. We did all of this work. I've tested it the best I can. It took me a few weeks to test. It's working great, and we were ready to deliver. And then the one of the regulators, like a third party, said that they wanted something else. Like, this feature that we build is obsolete. It doesn't work. It's not the way it's supposed to be, because it doesn't work for them. So we had to start from the beginning. And that also happens because you have such a small, such a small sprints. We built this in like 3 weeks and we delivered it, and it just didn't need it to be delivered. That's also could happen, but it's okay, because it's much better to deliver things quicker rather than, have them go for a year and then at the end it's not needed. What stage of the test plans created? Which stage will the test case be written? So the the test cases are written based on when in my experience, and most likely will be in yours, when you get the PRD. As soon as you get the documentation from your product manager, you already know what's going to be built. You can already start writing test cases. That's the time that you write test cases. You start writing test cases as soon as you get the product requirements, all the way until you get the actual product to test. And even at that point, most of the time, you're still going to be writing test cases because things might have changed throughout the development of the software. The team should be 6 to 10 members. Can you please tell me who are the members? Right. So it could be, it depends on how the team is organized. In my company, the team I work with, we have a product manager, a project manager who keeps track of like time schedule, and the product manager keeps track of the product and making sure that it's being built to the scope, to the way the customer wanted. We have two front-end developers, 2 back-end developers, and me, QA. So we have seven people. Sometimes there's also another person who talks to the customer to get their feedback. Like customers sometimes send tickets over through Zendesk to let us know if there's a bug or an issue, and we might have a person that has constant communication with the customer. Okay, story is simply how the user will use a feature to in a narrative form, or is it more complex than that? So a story, I think of a story is an idea of how a particular feature will be used. So let's say Instagram has a video, right? That you're able to record and post on your wall. So a story would be user opens up an Instagram app, hits the I don't remember how they do it in Instagram. They hits the plus button on their face, I think, on their avatar, and then the camera app opens up. The user hits the record button, camera starts recording, he lets go, and it saves. That's a story, essentially. A story is basically, think of it as a product manager is trying to show you and tell you how a story goes through, how a user goes through the application, and it's called a story. It's like a storyline, right? Please explain what you mean by writing test cases from the software document when the software is not ready yet, and so no bugs detected. Right, exactly. I mean, we have to go back here, right? So when the product manager talks to the customer, he will write requirements. The customer will tell him, I want this, 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 and that. I want this information. I want these buttons. I want this this website to have a map, and I want a login screen, and I want prices. And the product manager will take these requirements, will take this document, and he will give it to the team, meaning you are part of the team. And you're going to read this document and you can say, okay, how am I going to test this login screen? And you're going to start writing test cases on how you will be testing this login screen, right? And approaches to test a login screen, you're going to learn about those approaches later on. But essentially, you have the document and you can already start writing test cases. And once you get the login screen, you can use what you wrote out in the test case to test this login screen. Good questions, by the way. Narrative of a process of using a function in the software. I'm not sure, that's not a question, right? Do we test during the sprint or only during testing and product demonstration stage? Okay, so think of it as in the sprint, you can plan what you're going to be doing. So let's say in the sprint planning, you talk to your team and you tell them, okay, well, this sprint, what I'm going to be doing is I got the requirements. This sprint for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be writing test cases. because I don't have anything to test, but I have this documentation and I can write test cases. And so for the next 2 weeks, that's your sprint. That's what you're going to be working on. The sprint after that, let's say the next sprint comes along and the developer said, okay, we're finished building it. Now we're going to give it to you to test it. And during the next 2 weeks, during the next sprint, you're going to tell at sprint planning, okay, well, developers on Friday, they were able to build what they were building. And the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be testing. So for the next 2 weeks, for the next sprint, you as a QA, you're going to be doing testing. You're going to go through your test cases that you wrote out. You're going to press all the buttons. You're going to make sure all of the, all of the pages work, all of the colors match, all of the requirements are met based on the documentation that you got, prior 2 weeks. And that's your sprint. And in the next sprint, maybe during your testing, you found a bunch of bugs. And on the third sprint, you're going to get together on a call and you're like, oh, well, Mike found, 50 bugs. So for the next 2 weeks, maybe even 2 sprints, because he found so many bugs. 1 sprint is not enough. We're going to need 2 sprints to fix all of the bugs. And for the next 2 weeks, you and the developers are going to address all of the issues that you found. And that's how sprints are organized. Cool. Is there teams that have more than one manual QA? Absolutely. If it's a complex software, you might have a couple, 2 or 3. It's not uncommon. I worked with like 2 other manual QAs, and we also had a automation QA engineer in my team at one point. Please tell me, we write test cases during work, not off work. Yeah, you only want to work during work hours, not off work. Don't do anything off work. That's your time off. How many sprints can we have in one project? You can sprints never end most of the time. Sprints are ongoing because if you don't have any more sprints, that means your company doesn't build any more features. So Instagram, they have sprints. They're never stopped. They just they build new features, they add new filters to the camera, and they develop those using sprints. That's just the way sprints is the way you organize Scrum system, and you're staying agile. Are we going to be taught about writing test cases? Absolutely. What to write in those test cases. You will learn how to write test cases, and you will learn how to write good test cases, because not all QA engineers write good test cases. And here you will learn how to write good ones. Do we write a test case for sanity testing? Yes. Well, not necessarily. It depends. I mean, sometimes I do my sanity test just to make sure you stay sane, it's working. You don't necessarily need it, but if it's a complex system and you forget how to check certain things, you can write some test cases. Do write it. I'm a former teacher. I have PTSD of writing lessons all night. I'll be happy to write only during work hours. Yeah, I don't do anything outside of work hours, well, except for maybe sometimes working with you guys here. Do we write test cases before developers send it to us? You write test cases. I feel like I write test cases all the time. The more test cases you write, the better. I feel like as long as they're good, because a lot of the time when software gets built, it gets complex, more and more complex, and the new feature gets added to one of the parts of software that you haven't touched for maybe 3-4 months, and you forget how to test it. You forget what works, how things work there. So you can go back and remind yourself. You can go back to what you wrote, and you can see, oh, okay, this is where I need to click. This is what I'm supposed to see. And if it still matches, if it's still correct. So a lot of the time it can save yourself from just even remembering how certain parts of software work. Maybe you're on vacation and things changed, and you don't know how a particular feature works because it just got introduced while you're on vacation. Well, your coworker, somebody, another QA wrote test cases. So when he goes on vacation, you can look at those test cases and you can see how to test a particular feature. How are we doing on time? Well, Okay, doing okay. So I mean, how we know what to write before they send us the software? That's a good question. You have documentation. You have documentation from your product manager, and your product manager talks to the customer, and he writes this detailed document about what will be included in the software, how the software is supposed to act, what's going to be involved. You probably not going to see how the software at this point looks like. You don't even know, but you know what features is going to have. You know how things supposed to be there. Like if a customer wants a login screen, you have an idea of a login screen. You know, have an idea what you can test in a login screen. So you can write it in a test case. I will test, login screen. Here are the steps how I will test it. They're probably going to be already involved some of the things that's allowed, not allowed. It's usually very detailed, and you can use that to write test cases. As development goes by and you start seeing developers build out the software, you might get some glance on how it works and the functionality. You can go back to test cases and you can update them. You can add more things to it because now you have even more information. So by the time you get to QA, you can just follow the steps you wrote out, and you're going to be much, much quicker. You don't have to sit there and figure out, well, how do I test this? What do I need? You already know because you have everything written out. You prepared. That makes a good QA. I think this is the last slide I want to touch here. The agile release planning, and I think I kind of went over this in a previous slide, but just kind of reiterate how the planned release works. So agile release planning includes incremental releases of a product. It differs from traditional software planning where the focus is a major release. And agile release planning, the team prepares for planned releases, which break down into several different sprints or iterations. A sprint ends with new product increment, but that may not mean a product release general public, which happens. Each sprint should end with a new version of the product, which can be reviewed by the stakeholders. The duration of the sprint and the release cycle is usually decided by the senior management. For example, 1 sprint or 2-week release cycle. And that's essentially what I talked about last time. It's sometimes it takes more than 1 sprint to build a feature. It's not necessarily that you can build a feature in just 2 weeks, right? You might need 6 weeks to build a feature, and you break those things down into smaller sprints to make sure you delivered a certain part of a feature, not necessarily a whole thing. And then at the end of 3 sprints, you decide, okay, we build this feature, we've tested it, everything works great. Let's put it into version 1.4 rather than 1.3. So it's not always that you get to ship a product or a new version of the product every 2 weeks. It may be every 6 weeks, and you have different sprints, smaller sprints within those time frame. And you can look at some of these things like these could be chores, this could be little feature tickets, maybe bug tickets. And so, this would, let's say it's a small feature that's being built like a chore. A backend needs to build some kind of like a server code, right? And then you have these 3 that are front end that needs to build, let's say, different buttons and different colors and looks. And then in the next sprint, in the first sprint, they were able to accomplish that. In the next sprint, the black square here, this is you testing what was built in the first sprint, and you found a bug, and you reported a bug in the second sprint. In the third sprint, some of these things were built out. In the third sprint, you found some more bugs, and it kind of goes on and on and on. And that's how releases basically work. You can only get better at writing test cases as you do them. Yes, a good QA will gain experience. Yes, absolutely. Can you explain what the story backlog is in the picture? Here, the product backlog creation. So all of the tickets that weren't able to make it to the sprint, whether those bug tickets or feature tickets, and they're waiting their turn, they will be in the backlog. Jira is where we have the product backlog during a sprint. Jira is the tracking system. Yes, Jira is one of the tracking system. That's the most popular one. And I don't know if there's a picture of that here. No. Basically, Jira has the column. We talked a little bit about it. You probably, if you remember the screenshot of Jira, where there was like columns made, and each column represented where the state of a particular ticket is, or work, or feature, or bug, whatever that may be. And one of the first columns, it could be the backlog column, where there's a backlog column that's sitting with a bunch of feature tickets and bug tickets waiting for their turn. And as soon as we have a sprint planning call conversation, we would grab one of these feature tickets and we would move it, let's say, to another column that says to do. That's a Kanban system, right? That's what Kanban is. It's just feature. If the ticket's moving down the column from backlog to do, to code review, or whatever it may be, to ready for QA, to QA, or maybe to done. And it could be like 4 or 5 of those columns, maybe more, depending on how your team is organized at the company that you're going to be working at. And each one has a variation of that, but they're essentially similar, and that's a Scrum system. You're most likely going to be in a Scrum system, which is 15-minute stand-ups, some of those done every day, sometimes those are done like 3 times a week, whatever it may be. The requirements are captured in a product backlog, which contains list of all the features envisioned. That could be the case, yes, if it was, if your product manager was able to create all the tickets for each of the features that they want to build, then yeah, it could be like a long list of things. Okay, let's see. We don't have any more information here that I have. Let me double check, make sure I didn't forget anything. It's the final what to go use. You guys have any more questions? Does this make sense of how you will be working in like a Scrum system? Does this make sense how the waterfall and agile is different, right? Waterfall, agile, and then how agile methodology is organized using the Scrum system, and you're going to be working in a Scrum system with different sprints, different ways of picking up tickets, moving tickets, things like that. Okay, great, makes sense. Have to watch this class one more time. Okay, you will get a copy of it, absolutely. This last slide here, backlog is not clear to me. Okay, so think of okay, so this page here, this slide here, is one of the sprints in the release planning, right? And we have in the release planning we have a few sprints. So a sprint is usually 2 weeks, to keep it simple, right? And in a sprint, we want to figure out what is it that we want to accomplish in the next 2 weeks as a team, right? So we get together as a team, developers, product manager, QA, and we have sprint planning. You can see right here. We sit together, we have sprint planning. And in sprint planning, we decide what are we going to build in the sprint in the next 2 weeks. And we look at the backlog. We look at the backlog stories, and we're like, we think about, okay, well, what can we get done in the next 2 weeks? Who's in the office, right? Who's taking vacation? Do we have all of the engineers, or we only have, let's say, one person working, this next week? If we have everyone, that means we have a certain amount of people. That means we'll be able to pick up more work, right? We'll be able to pick up more bug tickets or more features that we can build. And we decide that we grab a bunch of these new features that we want to work on, and we pick them up, and we're going to decide that we're going to work on the next 2 weeks. So in the first sprint, in the first 2 weeks, we as a team decided that we're going to build this new feature where we are able to post an image to Instagram. as an example. And we started building it. And we got down to 2 weeks. At the end of 2 weeks, developers were able to build it, but QA didn't get the chance to test it. So we're going to have a retrospective, and we're going to have a conversation and say, okay, what did we able to get down for the last 2 weeks? Okay, we were able to build it, but did QA get to it? No, QA didn't get it. Didn't get to it. We didn't have enough time. We're going to need to move it over to sprint 2. So you go back home, you come back the next week on Monday, and you have a sprint planning. Again, you're going to start from the beginning. What did we get done last week? What do we need to do this week? This week, we need to test what we built last week by developers. QA, the next 2 weeks, you're going to be testing this feature where you can add an image to Instagram. And then the next in the second sprint, the next 2 weeks, it's your time. You're going to be testing it. You're going to find all the bugs. For the next 2 weeks, you found 50 bugs. At the end of the sprint, you have a conversation. You have a retro conversation again on Friday. Okay, guys, what did we able to do? Well, we were able to get, through all the testing, we found 50 bugs, but developers didn't have the time to fix any of them. Okay, let's move it over to sprint 3. So next week you come back and you plan the next 2 weeks, and in sprint 3 you start fixing these bugs. You verify, make sure they work, and at the end of sprint 3, or basically the week 6, you sit down, you have a conversation, and you figure out, okay, we got a chance to build everything we wanted to build, and we fixed all of the bugs we wanted to fix, and let's do a release. And the new release for Instagram is planned release 1.4, and now the customers are able to take pictures on Instagram. Essentially, that's the idea. Okay, let's see if, wow, questions, I missed a bunch. Let's see if I can get to them. How would the agile system be different using something other than Scrum, such as Kanban or? Okay, so agile is a methodology, right? But Scrum and Kanban is a method of using this methodology, right? Think of it as like, if you want to, if your team you're working with wants to be agile and wants to release different things quicker, you choose if you want to use a Scrum, or if you want to use Kanban, or if you want to use the FDD. It's a little bit different system. I'm not going to go into it a little bit. There's a few others. There's a bunch of different ones. And you can look those up. I recommend you looking those up. But most of the time, you're most likely going to be using Scrum, because most companies, use Scrum. And this is the Scrum system, essentially. Your team chose to use this Scrum system because it may be the best one for the software you're building, because it may be the best of getting feedback from your customers and releasing features as fast as possible to your customers. And sometimes Scrum doesn't work for everyone. Maybe Kanban is better. With Kanban, you don't have these sprints, and you have to accomplish certain things in 2 weeks. With Kanban, it's just an ongoing feature. You see a feature you need to build, you build it, you move to the next one. You don't have these like sprints. Maybe that's a better way, but it's not the wrong way, just another way. When we report a bug, what if the developer said it's not a bug? What are we going to do? Well, it depends on what led you to believe that it's a bug, right? Is it crashing? Well, it's pretty obvious. But if it's something that's like you read it, always go back. You always want to go back to the document the product manager put together. If it's not something that is in if it's not matching what is in a document by a product manager, and it's not working the way it's written there, that's a bug, right? So if a developer says it's not a bug, well, we're both seeing the same document, and then the document says that it's not working the way it's designed. That's a bug. Sprint backlog are basically set of tasks to be completed to realize the selected feature of the product backlog item. Right, exactly. It's just set of tasks, exactly what it is. Thank you, clear explanation, thank you. So basically we will be doing test cases on those features correctly? Yeah, yes. You will be most likely going to be writing test cases on all features. In some companies, there are more test cases to write and some less, but most of the time, there's a lot of test cases to write. That's all. It's a lot of what I do is writing test cases. What is the relationship like between tester and developers? Do they like us? Yes, absolutely. I mean, we make the software better. We find things that they missed. And you definitely want to have a good relationship with your developers. You want to feel comfortable being able to get in touch with them, and they should be comfortable getting in touch with you. You want to get on the call. A lot of the time, we figure out issues together. We'll get on Zoom, we'll share screen, and then we'll try to debug certain things together. You want to be, close enough for them to have that conversation. It's definitely helps. And developers are, yeah, absolutely. You find certain things that they miss, and then you make the software better. So that's what you do. You have to keep that in mind, is you make the product better. You are the flame holder. So can we say product backlog is the same as scope of the project or part of it? Product backlog is, what's another way to, I mean, it's just basically a to-do list of things that you guys want, I mean, not you guys, but a team wasn't able to get to. And, you want to make sure you don't forget that you need to get to it at some point. And then in that backlog, you can also prioritize things based on what you want to get to next in your next sprint, in your next 2 weeks. Because let's say customer says, I really need this new feature, but you've already scoped out 3 weeks in advance and you know what you're working on. So you're going to put it on backlog because you don't want to forget that you need to get this done at some point, but it's not something you can get to right away. Yes, simply a list of all things that needs to be done within the project. Yes, that's the simplest way. Do most of the companies use Agile? Yes. I see that in a lot of positions. Absolutely. Yes. Agile is the most popular right now, and probably will be for software companies and for companies that want to deliver the latest and the greatest to their customers, because they want to be on the edge of the latest technology, and Agile is what allows you to do that. With the Internet of Things, you can just download a new version and you can have a new version of the software within 5 minutes of a release. And companies want to make sure that you have the latest updates, the latest, if it's a security patch, you can have it right away. That's why Agile maybe not used like on hardware. Sometimes hardware companies don't use like an Agile system because they're not able to update software right away. The lesson is done. You guys are free to go. I don't have any more except for I'm just want to get to some of your questions. So we are going to learn about other features of Compound and XP. You're not going to learn. You don't need to. You're not going to learn about other ones because they're very similar to what we talked about here. And also, you're probably not going to be using the others. Like Scrum is the one you're most likely 90% of the time the companies use a Scrum system, maybe Kanban, but Kanban is just a simpler Scrum. How does dev feel about being told that there are still so much bugs? Well, it's okay. You cut the bugs. Trust me, it's much better that you catch the bugs than your customer. So if developers are missing something, you're helping them out. Don't think of that you're making their life harder. You're making their life easier. You're helping them out. You're helping them out build software better. You will be using Jira in later lessons, yes, and definitely get more hands-on with that. How Slack used? I need to understand of the few things. What are the times I can ask questions because I work overnight? So Slack is essentially it's like a chat application with certain things. It's certain features that makes it easier to communicate with your team. That's really all it is. Just an easy way to communicate. It's got very popular for one reason or another, but it's a messaging app, really. Okay, what app will you use to create test cases? You will use TestRail, most likely, to learn to write test cases, but you can write test cases in Google spreadsheet. So, but you will go over TestRail, and that's probably the most popular one right now. Okay, so it looks like we're at the end of, I don't see any more questions. We did 2 hours with you guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I hope I answered all the questions, and there's 80 of you guys, and we got to everything, and this made sense. And thank you. You guys have a good night, and I hope to see you guys soon.